It is Thursday, so welcome to Event Domination. This is my favorite show because I got to talk about all the ridiculous stuff that has happened behind the scenes as I've scaled my conference, what's worked, what hasn't worked, how you can scale your own event, because running my event totally changed my life. We were actually just running a 2-day workshop here online. And I was sharing a lot of different stories about all the good things that come out of running events. It's been totally game-changing and mind-blowing. And today, I want to share some horror stories. Everything that has gone wrong, what we did to fix it, the impact of it. And I've got 5 specific stories I want to talk about, each of them touching on different parts of events and how we can solve them. Because if you're thinking about launching your first event, you'll definitely want to hear this. If you're already running conferences and trying to scale it, you'll definitely want to hear this as well, because I promise you, everybody will have something here to learn from with these stories. So without further ado, I want to take you back to the very first year I launched my conference. So I didn't know what I was doing. I had this crazy idea that I wanted to run this big conference and have Kevin O'Leary come on as a speaker. And it was pretty crazy. And looking back, I was very underqualified, but we made it happen. So what I did is I realized we started with 2 people on the team. And then we realized we needed somebody with event experience, not necessarily for the planning and vision, but more for the actual execution, boots on the ground, that type of thing. So a friend of mine actually worked previously with like an event planner, producer type of person. And so, I got hooked up with her. And so she was in charge of doing a lot of different stuff with the event. In terms of like execution, because the whole thing was, hey, I've done this before. I'm very experienced. I do all this type of stuff. Let me help you. And so she started, working, and it was several months. And we were about, I think it was like 6 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks before the conference actually happened. And we discovered, or maybe it was actually less than that. Maybe it was like 4 weeks. But anyways, we discovered that a lot of the stuff that was supposed to be done hadn't even been finished. So here we are, the conference is coming up like in weeks. And basically there was nothing going on. And because at the time I was very inexperienced, I didn't know expectations in terms of what those deliverables looked like. That was on me. But essentially, in a number of weeks, we had to figure out, okay, how do we fix this? Then we ended up with somebody else who came in and inherited a huge pile of shit. But yeah, so that was huge, because here I was, very first event. We brought somebody on to cover like a lot of stuff, and nothing happened. It was really, really, really bad. So, I think the lesson for you, if you're launching your first event, number one, like, I think I had the right idea. Like, you want to learn from somebody who's done it before. But my issue or my mistake, and this is what I find with a lot of people, because like we do a lot of consulting with events now. And actually, we were just on a call with somebody looking to scale their event. What I found is you can hire an event planner. And event planners are great because they take care of making sure the place looks good. They make sure everybody's in at the right time. Everybody's where they're supposed to be. That's an event planner. But the big thing I've learned is there's a big difference between being able to plan an event and owning and operating and scaling an event. Very, very different. On one side, you're execution, you're like employee. On the other side, you're the business owner hat. And what I really needed at that time was somebody to come in with the business owner hat of events and say, hey, this is exactly how you set this thing up. This is how blah, 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 rather than, oh yeah, like I can come in and plan it for you. And I think a lot of people, because like we get people every single day who come in and they'll ask us for help, and they'll tell us what their situation is, and they get sucked into thinking, oh yeah, well, I just need an event planner. Well, no, you're in the business of events. You need somebody who understands the business of events, not somebody who can just like plan and make sure the tables look good. So that's horror story number one. That was a huge mistake. Now, second story about things going wrong. So this actually just happened a number of months ago. So remember when we had that huge outage? Airlines went down, hospitals went down. Was it Cloudflare? Robbie, do you remember what it's called? I don't remember. Okay, yeah, I think it was Cloudflare. Anyways, worldwide outage for everything. So we were running this 2-day workshop, and another speaker was coming in with me to provide some content. And we had everything planned out. It was going to be a 2-day workshop. Everything was going to be great. But then this huge airline outage hit. All these flights got canceled all over the place. It was a total mess. So on one side, we had a bunch of attendees who were stuck in airports and who couldn't make it from all over North America because the airlines weren't operating that day. So that was a headache number one. But number two, the speaker who I was running this thing with was stuck in an airport for 2 days, basically, and couldn't get on a flight. So there was me on location because I live close by. And so we had less attendees than we expected because everybody was stuck with their flights. And then there was me, and we had planned out this whole 2-day workshop where we would be tag teaming and delivering different content. It was a really good schedule. But all that disappeared in thin air when all the systems crashed. And I talk a lot about this in terms of speaking on stage and how you prepare. Because the one thing when you're speaking is you have to know if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. It's Murphy's Law. And there was no way I could have predicted this whole airline crash and hospital emergency rooms had to go back to paper, all the electronics weren't working, all that stuff. So it was a pretty big issue. But from a speaker perspective, I find a lot of new people when they're looking to get on stage and they're giving presentations, they focus too much on memorizing the words and not understanding the content, right? So don't focus on the words, focus on the material. And what I mean by that is, if I'm a speaker and I know the material, I know the stories and how those stories wrap into something else, rather than and the frameworks and everything I'm teaching, rather than memorizing specific words. Because what happens is if you're a new speaker, and I get it, because a lot of new speakers are like, oh, I'm just going to memorize my whole presentation and that way it's going to be perfect. But what happens if something goes wrong? You're not able to transition from just memorizing the words over to ad-libbing. It doesn't work. So what you need to do is you need to focus on the material. So memorize the stories, the concept of the stories, but not the specific words to the story. You have to understand your frameworks and how they relate to everything else, but don't memorize specific words. Because this is what happened to me. All of a sudden, we've got attendees who can't show up, so we had half the number. And then we had the speaker who was supposed to be doing 50% of the day not being able to show up. And now all of a sudden, I go from having to deliver, let's say, 3 hours of content to now 6 hours of content. If I just focused on memorizing specific scripts, I'd be screwed, because how can you come up with three extra hours of content? It doesn't happen. But because I understood the stories, the frameworks I wanted to get across, how everything was interconnected, I knew my material, I can then expand and contract where needed to fit the time frame. Because we've all been in situations where you're speaking and then you get the nudge and then it's like, oh crap, I have to fill another 20 minutes. If you understand your material, you can keep going along the vein you're on and just add more detail, an extra story, an extra framework, another example. You have all that. So what you want to do is you want to build this catalog in the back of your brain. And it's like a library. you've got all the different shelves. Maybe you've got a shelf for stories, a shelf for framework, shelf for examples. And as you're on stage, you're just dipping back into that library and bringing something out rather than following a templated presentation and script, because that's not pliable. And if there's one rule, like I said, it's like things always go wrong. So you have to be able to dodge and weave, the 5 Ds of dodgeball. Duck, dip, dodge, something, and dodge. So that's what you got to do. All right. So number 3, when things go wrong, picture this. We're in COVID lockdowns. I'm launching my first conference, and then the lockdown gets lifted. Everybody's happy. And then the government imposes a second lockdown and everything grinds to a halt all over again. Shit hit the fan because what happened was nobody bought tickets to my conference because everybody was scared that there would be a third and a fourth and a fifth lockdown. There was a lot of uncertainty in the air because nobody could control what the government did, right? It was, we opened back up and then all of a sudden, oh no, we're locked down again. And then we have all these restrictions and everybody's lining up at the grocery store. Really tough situation to be in. And so at first, when you're launching an event, you launch it and then you have issues with, you got to figure out your marketing system, your sales system. And at first I thought, okay, well, maybe it's the lead generation, maybe it's the marketing, the advertising, the copy, the hooks, whatever it is. And we went through a whole bunch of different variations of that. No, like it was pretty much the same result. Maybe it's our offer, like what's going on, like maybe it's our pricing, the ticket. And then no, it wasn't really that. And we realized there was nothing we could really do because the only reason people weren't buying is because they were absolutely terrified that the government was going to impose another lockdown. The event wouldn't happen. They would lose money, all this type of stuff. So at that point, to be honest, like we didn't really have too much we could do. I'm a very stubborn person. And, there was a point where it's like, hey, we should postpone. And at that point, I was so fed up with the lockdowns. And what was happening is I was very stubborn. I just said, no, like I'm running this conference. Screw this. I'm tired of this whole situation. I'm running this conference. We're doing this. This is what's happening. And in hindsight, that was a really good decision because I think it was maybe like 6 weeks or so before the lockdown, like when the lockdown was lifted, and then we had 6 weeks to run and gun and sell a ton of tickets. And it just basically flooded in. All these tickets flooded in as soon as that lockdown lifted. But we still had a lot of uncertainty with what was going on in the marketplace. And a lot of people, we hit 1,000 people the first year. I firmly believe we would have been a lot bigger had we not had that cloud looming over everybody. Because at that point, the second lockdown lifted, but there were a ton of people who were just who just couldn't get over the fact, like, hey, like what happens if the lockdown comes in again, like the day before? Like I don't want to buy a ticket. And sure enough, we picked up people in the second year, but that was a really, really tough situation. And I think with events, there's things that you can't control. There's some events where, the speaker was supposed to, they sold tickets and then the speaker has died, a month or two before the event. What do you do? So you always have to be able to pivot. So now with us, we're always thinking of contingencies. So, hey, if so-and-so, if speaker can't make it or speaker like bails or something pops up, they have a health issue, what's our plan B? We always have a plan B. For speakers, we have plan Bs for literally everything now at this point, because, when things like that happen, that's that black swan event. You can't control it. So the only thing you can do is roll off of it and salvage it by having a backup. But it's much better to have a backup in place, well in advance. So that way, if something does happen, you already have that plan, because you're going to panic. You're going to have those emotions. And when you do, you're not going to be able to think clearly. So I would much rather front load all of that planning when we have a clear head and we're not stressed. So then when something does happen in that stressful situation, it's like, okay, well, I'm stressed out, I'm freaking out, but like, let me just look at what we planned, what what we would do, and you're just executing. You don't have to feel all of the emotions at that point and go through the ups and downs trying to figure out what you're going to do, because it's like, oh, okay, well, this is plan B. Let's execute. It just makes it a whole lot easier. Okay, so this moving to our second year with our big conference. We had this registration system, and we had like 2,500 people out to that conference, and we had this registration system we paid a lot of money for. And what happened was the registration system crashed as we were trying to register people. So just picture, because this happened on the Friday, and then it was pooch for Saturday too. So on the Friday, we had, let's call it like 800 people coming through the door with registration. We run topic specific workshops, all of that type of stuff. We have this registration system where it's supposed to be easy. You scan a QR code, it marks them in, they get their badge, everything's great. In theory, that worked. But the day of, everything crashed. So now that QR code is useless. We have to search people up. And it was just a total nightmare. And we had lineups, and it was like driving me nuts, and it was just not efficient. And then we ended up behind schedule. It was not a good situation. And we don't speak that company's name anymore. But yeah, so the lesson we've learned with that one is we always have old school backups for everything. So, whatever registration system we're using now, we have backup paper copies of every single registration list, multiple copies all over. So in the event, because the way when you're registering thousands of people on like the first day, you have multiple stations and staff. At every station, we have backup copies of everything. So because we learn from experience, if something crashes and doesn't work, no problem. We switch right to paper, and it takes a little bit longer, but we're prepared. Our mistake that 1 year was we never considered the whole system crashing. It just never came into our mind. So now we go into it assuming something's going to break, and we just have all of that stuff ready to rock and roll. So it's more of a seamless transition. And plus, the other thing with that is we had an event app where, we run an expo trade show, right? Expo trade show and all that stuff. And, somebody's supposed to come in and scan their phone, and then it was supposed to exchange info. That crashed too, because the whole system was poached. So that caused so many issues. All right. So always assume whatever registration and technology you have is going to break. Always make that assumption and have a backup for it. Paper and pen and highlighters work really well in a pinch. All right. So last story I want to share, and this is like, I have two examples for this. So I remember the 1 year we had a speaker, and he was in the area within an hour and a half. He has a place here, and his driver had been arranged to pick him up and bring him to the venue. Unfortunately, his driver misscheduled things and had it in his calendar that he was going to pick him up the next day, not the actual day. So we get this phone call from the speaker. It's like, hey, my driver forgot to get me. I'm really sorry. I'm hopping in a car. I'm driving there. And so he had to drive himself to the venue out of the city and everything. And obviously that caused some delays, quite a big delay actually. And so nobody really knew. The attendees, we never announced anything. But backstage, we're like, crap, the speaker is supposed to go on for his keynote, and he's not here. And he's on his way, but with traffic and everything, it was a big variable. So we had the powwow, and it was decided that I would go on stage and do another whole presentation and talk about more stuff, totally unplanned, off the cuff. And so, the lesson here is, as a speaker, as somebody who's running the event, and if you're the talent on stage as well, you always want to have a couple backup presentations that you can run that align with everything you've talked about, that you can just pull off in a pinch. Because I'll give you the second example. So we had another speaker another year flying in on his jet, ran into some passport issues crossing the border. And so he was also delayed. So here I am on stage, and you know how you have the confidence monitors in front of the stage. I get this big message in red, speaker so-and-so is not here, stall. And that's all I see. And it's like, great. So now you're on stage, you've got your slides, you've got your presentation. This is why I say you have to have that library in the back of your head. You can't just practice that script, because now I had to go out and just extend for an indefinite period of time because nobody knew what was going on. Like I just had to stall and keep going. And obviously the audience doesn't know, but you're wrapping up your presentation. You've maybe got another 5-10 minutes to go. And now you have to keep talking and talking, and you have no idea when it's going to end. So what you want to do is you want to have like open loops that you can close. So you mention a story, an idea, you tell a story about it, you share the framework about it, and then you want to end it in a way so if like the speaker actually shows up that you can cut it and it makes sense, or you can actually loop it into another one. So eventually, I forget how long I had to stall for, maybe like 15-20 minutes. And then finally, it's like speaker is here. It's like, whoo, and then you can go backstage. So, for if you're the person, if you're the talent on stage, if you're the main person running it, if you're hosting the conference, or even if you're just a regular speaker, you always want to be prepared for having to extend your time on stage. Always be prepared. So for me now, because I've learned that lesson, I always have like another presentation in my back pocket that doesn't necessarily have slides, because it's like sometimes, like this year, I had a backup one with slides and it was a full out thing, ready to rock and roll. But you don't need that. You just need to have some type of framework of a talk where in your head that you know how it's going to flow, the topic, the stories, the frameworks, generally like 3 to 5 of those that you're going to weave in. So that way you can get up on stage and then you can mix and match as needed. Maybe you have to fill 15 minutes. You can do that quick, boom, boom, boom. Maybe you have to fill 35 minutes, boom, boom, boom. Maybe you have to fill 60. And you can expand and compress it as you need to really make it fit the situation. Because when you're on stage and you see the message, so-and-so isn't here, stall. It's like, okay, here we go. You have no idea what's coming up. Or, hey, so-and-so isn't here yet. They're stuck. They haven't arrived, flight delayed, whatever it is. Crap. Okay. What are we going to do? What's the plan? Okay, well, I've got this presentation in my back pocket. This is what I'm going to deliver until so-and-so gets here. Like you just have to roll with the punches with events. So, I've talked about hiring the wrong people. I've talked about flight delays and content. I've talked about registration system crashing. And then I've talked about, just people being delayed or showing up, and you have no control over it. And you can't sweat it. So like I said, and I sound like a bit of a broken record, but if you can just plan for the worst up front, way ahead of time, you have everything. And it's important that the team knows what's going to happen too when something goes wrong, not just you. So it's like you have your pre-event team meetings. Hey, if X happens, this is the process. If Y happens, this is the process. So that way everybody's on the same page. There's no panic, because the last thing you want, because like events are stressful as it is, and there's always things going wrong. The last thing you need is to introduce more panic into the situation by not having a plan. Have a plan up front. And we can help you with that too. So if you're trying to scale your event, if you're trying to run your first event, if you're trying to sell more tickets, sell more stuff, we can help you with that. That's what we do. So just go to theconferenceaccelerator.com. You can book a call with my team. We can help you with your event, get everything straightened out, and we can actually just give you our systems and our backup plans and all of the contingencies, because we've had a couple doozies over the years with things going wrong. So, but it's not so bad when you know what to do. So if you need help scaling your event, because events have changed my life, the best thing you can do to generate high quality leads and make sales, run an event. So go to theconferenceaccelerator.com, check it out. We'll talk with my team and see if we can help you guys out. Okay, so I hope this was helpful. Shared a couple of the stories that used to give me nightmares, and I'll see you guys next week.